So I'm Associate Professor Loy Hui Chieh from the Philosophy Department. I've been teaching for the department since 2006. Encourage that if you want to do this properly, debriefing the students, closing the feedback loop is actually very important, right? As I already said just now already, there are different affordances to different assessment modes. Some assessment modes front load the effort, others back load the effort, right? MCQ is kind of like front and back, but in a different way, right? So there are certain modes where it takes you half a minute to come up with a question, but it takes you many minutes to mark one answer because you want to give proper feedback, right? But for MCQ, what I would say is that the marking is machine, but then spend time explaining to students why is it the option A is wrong, why is it the option B is wrong, why is it option C is correct, and why even though many of you thought that option D is correct, well, that just shows that you didn't really understand this particular thing, right? So when we write those debriefs, the way I think about it is, if I cannot even convince myself why option A is wrong, why should I expect the students to see that point? I'm not saying that they already got it. I'm saying that I need to be able to explain from the material, from the reasoning, why is it option A is wrong? And by the way, 33% of you actually pick option A. This tells me that you probably misunderstood this thing here, right? So I must be able to say that because otherwise, I'm not even convinced myself. Those debriefing documents are actually very important in the whole learning cycle. A lot of it is a lot of pedagogical issues will arise, right? Is it fair to test them on this particular aspect of the understanding since we haven't quite taught a certain thing yet? So with that kind of questions, or it is really fair, but maybe our words a little bit too convoluted. Can we find a way to streamline this a little bit without losing that whole issue of being able to find the correct information within a larger mass of potentially just story, right? So there are all these connections, there are all these questions. And then we also get into, hey, hold on a second, are we assuming that this doctrine is, is true and it's not? We shouldn't assume that because we didn't tell them that this doctrine is true and we totally do not do such things, right? So we have to be very careful, and that's why it's a whole effort. And the tutors themselves debate among themselves their own questions, even before they reach me, so to speak. Yeah. The questions themselves, as I said, they really need to have one correct answer. And ideally, it shouldn't be just sort of like the best answer, but by right, it should be the only correct answer, by right? But it's not always easy to set questions like that. But what it does mean is that every wrong option implies a kind of a conceptual misunderstanding of the content, right? So that means that if you can correctly or convincingly explain not just why A is correct, but why B is wrong, and in a sense, you have set the right kind of questions. So the answers are not arguable, but getting to the answer requires reasoning. That's the idea. The lowest hanging fruit is communications more than anything else, actually, right? Is making sure that progressively the students really we reinforce the point that you need to think a little bit harder about this. Now, to be fair, I'm in a sense, don't get me wrong, I don't think that many students are consciously trying to just get the mark. Some students are like that, right? The middle group of students, what's happening is that they may not realize, but they have kind of outsourced a little bit of the thinking to their friends. So it's not that they necessarily are trying to fight for the mark and that's all there is. But what's happening is that they have gotten a bit of understanding, but a lot of the understanding depends upon their peers being around them. This is my hypothesis. But once the peers are not there, then of course they can't quite do the thing as sharply, right? Now, let's be honest about it. In real life, is this necessarily like a really bad thing? There's a reason why we want friends, right? There's a reason why we want people to be able to work in teams and collaborate, because we are all limited to some degree. That's why I don't believe that this is necessarily like a deep problem that I absolutely want to insist that we solve to the last ounce, to the last degree. It may not be worth the trouble, right? But the communications is important, helping students understand that if they are targeting not just scores in the quiz, but they are trying to get understanding, maybe proxied by the final exam, then they need to think about their own understanding. a little bit more to the communication. A lot of it is not just about general comms, but it's also about making sure that when students ask you questions for clarification, you make them work for the answer. Okay, so of course, students are very smart about this. They always go to the tutors and I to try to sort of ask us questions where, in a way, it's as if they are designing their own MCQs to see how we answer so that they can figure out the answer, right? So in a way, they are learning too, ironically, right? But we always try to make sure that we don't just simply give them the answer, even by answering their questions, but by simply sort of like, no, wait, hold on a second. How do you think about this again? Is this how you think about that, right? Isn't this what that says? And then some of them, after two or three exchanges, they'll be like, oh, I just got it. Right? It's like, okay, good for you. So it takes a bit of effort, but I think that it's worth doing. Yeah. The code was this is actually a quote from some military academy somewhere. Amateurs talk about tactics and strategies, and professionals talk about logistics. Right? The reason is because students are here to learn. If it turns out that a lot of the things they are doing are simply, for instance, trying to figure out where to go, what to do, when's my deadline, in a sense, we're not maximizing the time that they have in terms of learning, right? Given modern platforms, a lot of those purely logistical questions are actually pretty straightforward. Everything is on Luminous. Just follow the learning flow, right? All the quizzes are there. No excuse anymore, right? In the old days, we published a course description with all the details in one document. But these are all just us thinking logistically, right? Making sure that students pay full attention to the learning rather than worrying about, how am I supposed to get from point A to point B? Where am I supposed to go next? Where are all the readings again? What I don't even know where all the readings are. I mean, stuff of that nature, right? So that's one part of the situation. But there's more to this. If you're teaching a very large class, you have to care about the logistics. Suppose you are trying to set an MCQ test for 400 students. What is your best method today? Once upon a time, you gather them in one large LT and you hand out 400 pieces of paper and ask them to write on it. Really? You're going to collect all that back? And then how are you going to process that? How are you going to make sure that everyone has turned in? You see that there are a lot of these purely logistical or mechanical things that is a waste of my time in the modern world, right? Yeah, we still do bubble forms in the final exams, in the last iteration because we still have physical. And then there's an advantage of physical exams, don't get me wrong, okay? But there's a certain sense in which most of this actually really shouldn't be happening. We have better platforms today, right? So that we should streamline as much as this is possible because it reduces the friction, it reduces the chances of error, right? The more human beings there are counting individual scripts, the more possibilities of error, the more needed, there's more need to wait for each other, right? So anything that can be simplified, that can make it easier for the whole process to work, logistics, right? Invest in it, make sure that you understand how it's done. But it also means that you don't overcomplicate your own process, right? If you have multiple components or assessment, that makes it very hard to calculate, and then you need to do calculus just to make sure people have a mark. Something is wrong somewhere, right? So there are all these, things that a lot of it is necessity is the mother of invention. When you are teaching a very large class, a largish class anyway, 400 plus students, I don't think there's much luxury to be playing around. You just have to think a bit more logistically. How do I make sure that 460 students get this, piece of paper? Why even a piece of paper? This document or whatever, right? And leveraging modern platforms to do it. It's not even about the tech, by the way. It's not about the tech. The tech helps us, but it's about the thinking behind why we bother to do this. Because we're trying to reduce friction.